Oh, hello. Welcome to another Tabletop Impulse video. Today we're going to be doing a rundown of the Kill Team FAQs from November 2022. So, we're going to start with the core rules. There's a lot of things for the core rules, so let's go through them. This will take quite a little bit of time. So, missions. For the plant banner tactical objective, an operative that cannot perform the pickup action be selected to carry the banner token? No. So this stops things like glitchlings from doing plant banner. I mean glitchlings, the little extra things that Gallowdark can have. Interestingly, I don't think it stops dogs, either Croot Hounds or the Starstriders Canid, from carrying the banner, because they can pick up. They can't do other mission actions, but they can pick stuff up. So a little bit of nuance to that. When using the sentries rules, when do you determine line of sight for raising the alarm? So this is the sort of, I think, generally disregarded sentries expansion that came out in White Dwarf and was reprinted in the annual. Before and after a mission is performed, operatives can move into line of sight during an action, but the alarm isn't raised unless they start or finish the action in line of sight. So they've made it effectively even harder for the sentries to spot the infiltrator, which I already thought was the downfall of that sentries mode of play, because you can move through line of sight as long as you start and end your move out of line of sight, which is... They're moving towards a understanding of movement for the whole game where realistically your model doesn't exist between the 2 points at which it moves, so it makes sense in like overall kind of making the game feel similar, but I think that the infiltrator did not need a further bonus in the sentries game mode. For the Duel of Wits mission in the Critical Operations Mission Pack core book, do players have to select different objective markers to be the priority objective marker? Yes, they do. The Duel of Wits one is the one where you have 2 priority objective markers and they give extra victory points and a command point. I'm not sure why you'd ever double up, because it seems to be, if your opponent says, I want this one, and you say, I also want that one, like you're playing into your opponent's hands somewhat, aren't you? But yeah, you can't do that. Well, I wouldn't have thought you couldn't do that, but I wouldn't have thought you'd want to do that. General principles. Does an action performed when an Overwatch hasn't been activated count as an activation? Does an action performed when an operative hasn't been activated count as an activation, e.g. Overwatch or a free dash action from recon in the scouting step? So the things that you can do with your operatives are not activations. Are they activations? No, they're not activations. I'm not sure what has prompted that question, but it makes sense to me as a clarification, and I would have always played it that way, I think. Question: if an operative carrying an objective marker or token loses the ability to perform the pickup action during the battle, e.g. unleash Demon Legionary Anointed, when your anointed kind of evolves into a demon, what happens to the marker or token? The operative must drop it. What I find interesting about this is the fact that it's a core rule FAQ and not an FAQ in the Legionary rules, which implies to me that they're bringing us future kind of transforming operatives in the same way as the Legionary transforms, because at the moment, unless I'm very mistaken, let me know in the comments, I can't think of any other operative that transforms into a state where it loses pickup. But if we are getting further kind of werewolf type mechanics in the game, that would be pretty cool. Question: if an operative performs an action during another action, e.g. an operate hatch action during a normal move, when can they be interrupted for things like a guard attack or the Phobos strike team in Curse of Marksman track target action? Answer: after the operative performs any action, even if another action is still ongoing. For example, you could interrupt them after they perform the operate hatch action or after they fully perform the normal move. So whilst what I said before is true, they seem to be trying to align it so that your move action is instantaneous. The operate hatch action does break that up and give you an opportunity to interrupt in the middle of the move action at the point at which they can finish opening the hatch, which is good, makes sense. Characteristics. So we're going to go over here now. If an operative's characteristics are modified during an action, does that impact the action it's currently performing? For example, if your movement characteristic is modified during a normal move as a result of being injured. So this chains off the other one, right? So if you're doing a normal move and you open a hatch in the middle of your normal move, and then you're shot by a guard action or a Phobos guy during your normal move, and you become injured, do you immediately then lose the extra circle of movement? And it says no, you apply the modifier once you've completed the action, so you still continue that move at the full move that you were on when you started the action. Now, I mean, this is interesting because it's funny. The Phobos interrupt has been there for a while now, but it's only because Into the Dark's come out, I think, that people are playing more interrupts, more guard actions are happening, and all these little things are wrinkling to the surface. Question. Some rules clarify that a modifier should only be applied if an enemy operative is activated within X of a relevant operative, e.g. the Rust animation strategic ploy for Gallowdark's infected only to attract the circle from their movement characteristic as a result of being injured if they're activated within the engagement range of the friendly operative. What does this mean? Do not apply that specific modifier unless the operative is activated with X the relevant operative. In this example, movement will be the specific modifier. I think this is just Games Workshop being pissed off with people because they've just rewritten the question as the answer. I think they think it's perfectly clear, and I think the FAQ writer is struggling to understand why the question was asked, right? I'm with the FAQ writer on this. I struggle to understand why the question was asked. So there are a few of these abilities, usually where you're counting as injured, right? And then it says, but you only have the movement penalty for counting as injured if you start your move within this aura, not if you end the move within this aura. It makes perfect sense to me, but this FAQ adds nothing to my understanding. If I've missed some nuance here, let me know, but this just seems like Games Workshop being puzzled that an obvious question was asked. Right, here's the meat of the section. We're talking about Gallowdark exclusively now. So kill zones. In kill zone Gallowdark, the wall trait says operatives cannot move over or through wall terrain regardless of any other rules other than as a result of the accessible trait. Do you really mean this? Or can operatives move through walls as a result of rules like breach and breach point? Yes, we really mean this. As unique as it might seem, allowing certain operatives to move through walls is a fundamental feature of Killzone Gallowdark, and therefore it's prohibited in order to maintain the experience and balance that we feel is appropriate for this kill zone. I'm really glad this FAQ is here, to be honest, because a lot of people, when the Gallowdark rules first came out, were looking especially at the hatch cutter in the Navy breaches and going, surely they don't mean that the Navy breacher can't breach through the walls, because it really seems narratively that that's what he's supposed to be able to do, and there was a walk-on battle report where that's what happened in the battle report, and all these sorts of things, and it's clarifying that yes, they meant what they said. You cannot move through walls with these abilities. I think most people by now were playing it that way, and most people had accepted that that was how it was supposed to be. But I think it's nice to come out and say it like, yep, we know that it's unique, which is a great insult, right? I know this is a unique situation. Oh, that's a really unique piece of work that you've done there, Johnny. You know, I'm going to use that, right? I'm going to use that as a put down. Unique, that's good. It's strange. It is still strange from a narrative point of view that your Navy breacher hatch cutter can't cut through the walls in the ships that he's breaching, despite that being the thing that he's right. But the rules are what the rules are, and that's what we've been playing. Well, I haven't actually played any Into the Dark, but that's what people have been playing, so that is definitely nailed on the rule, which is good. On mission maps, Killzone Gallowdark, does the position of hatchways indicate the direction the hatch should open in? No, they simply identify with the orientation of the long walls with hatchways. Yeah, this was a stupid little internet drama over nothing where people were like, oh my god, Games Workshop can't even make a map and the doors on the side and they can't be on that side and they have to open the other way, and why is the rulebook wrong, and oh my god, and it was just, man, the little lines are just on an arbitrary side of the diagram. They just indicate where the hatch is. Like, I know that you need to be angry, but yes, the way that relies on your game components not being totally broken is the way that it's supposed to work. In Killzone Gallowdark, does the hatch of an open hatchway provide cover, and is it obscuring? Yes, treat cover lines that go underneath it as crossing it. So this is a nuance here, really, that I think a lot of people have missed. The movable hatchways on on the Gallowdark terrain pieces themselves. When that door is open, you have to physically push the door to the maximum fully open angle. It does say this in the rules, and that door then at that new fully open angle is a part of the terrain. It is not abstracted away. The physical door is still part of the cover, and it's still obscuring. So that is an important little wrinkle. In Killzone Gallowdark, how do you resolve rules that require an operative to be in a certain distance of heavy terrain? This is a really interesting rule because later on in the FAQ, they've basically, as far as I can see, they've turned off nearly every tactical objective that requires you to be near heavy terrain. So I don't really know what rules they're talking about here. But how do you resolve rules that require an operative to be within a certain distance of heavy terrain? Resolve this only by using pillars and wall ends, excluding wall ends for hatchways, and heavy terrain from Killzone Gallowdark supplement, e.g. ancient apparatus. Right? Yeah. Just to be really clear, what it isn't saying is that the doors and walls and things don't provide obscuring, because we've had this before. Obscuring and heavy are separate and fungible. This FAQ is strange because it feels like it's aimed at tactical objectives, but then they've turned off most of the tactical objectives. I'm sure there's going to be headaches later on where people look at these two and argue that they contradict each other. To me, they make perfect sense because this isn't talking about obscuring. Don't have the word obscuring in your mind when you think about this rule at all whatsoever. Close quarters. How does the guard action work when the operative must perform a shoot action with a particular weapon, e.g. Bolter Discipline, Exalted Astartes, Dash and Dash? The operative can perform the guard action so long as the relevant weapon is selected and if it performs Overwatch or point blank Overwatch using the subsequent guard attack. Yep, so you can shoot once with your bolter and then go on guard, that's fine, and then you must then shoot with your bolter. How can an operative equipped with a ranged weapon that has the heavy... now this is a really good one. So, can an operative equipped with a ranged weapon that has the heavy special rule perform a normal move, a fallback or charge action, and then perform a guard action in the same activation? If so, can it subsequently use the heavy weapon for the guard attack? Yes. So this is one of those ones where the people who are going, well, technically have won. So, because they were saying, well, technically, you can move and then go on guard and then shoot a heavy weapon. And people were going, that doesn't seem quite kosher. And here is Games Workshop saying, nope, that's fine, that's the rules. You can move and then go on guard and then shoot your heavy weapon, even if you couldn't have moved it and shot it usually. So that's good for those people that wanted that to be the case, I guess. And generally speaking, I think it's positive because generally speaking, like most weapons that have heavy feel like they don't deserve to have heavy, right? Heavy is a real pain in the backside whenever it crops up. So this just gives the heavy teams a little bit of a leg up, which is good. Question: if an operative incapacitates an enemy operative in a hatchway fight action, can rules that take effect when an enemy operative is incapacitated in combat within engagement range or black still work, like the Robin Ransack attack op? Yes, just abstracted. It's just a close combat. God, fine, done. Can an operative perform hatchway fight action as a guard attack, as a hatchway fight action is treated as a fight attack? Again, yes. People reading too much into hatchway fight as a thing. It's fine. It's anything that you think should work because it's a combat attack. Go for it. We're not done with core rules. There's more core rules changes in the other document, right? And these are potentially the bigger ones. I don't know. The charge action. If an operative has a rule that allows it to perform a charge action while within engagement range of an enemy operative, but it can move out of engagement range of enemy operatives, but must still finish that move within engagement range of at least one enemy operative. So this is related to the Raiders chapter trait on the intercession team is the big example that comes to my mind. I assumed that was how it worked. Again, people on the internet get into a bit of a twist about how things work when it's not totally 110% nailed down, but that is how I assumed it would work. So you can charge out of engagement range one operative into engagement range with another operative, but you can't weirdly change charge so you're not in engagement. Yeah. Controlling objective markers and tokens. During operatives' activations, determine the control of objective markers and tokens at the start and end of each individual action. So you can't control an objective by moving over the objective without stopping. You have to move onto the objective and stop, or dash onto the objective and stop. But you can move onto the objective, stop, control it, dash off the objective, that's fine. It's just, again, cementing this idea that they're putting in through this FAQ that your move is like an instant kind of a teleport, I guess, like an instant. You go from one state to the other state unless there's an action like an operate hatch that comes in the middle. This clarification makes me sad because it just implies that somebody out there doesn't understand what narrative play is for. In a Spec Ops campaign, gaining experience, add the following to the relevant part of the second bullet point. If an operative completes any mission actions in a battle, excluding the operate hatch action. So you can't farm XP by standing in your drop zone, opening and closing the door, and gaining an experience point every time if you're playing narrative play. I don't know why that was needed. It makes you lose some faith in humanity that needs to be explained to people, but there you go. Kill zone, right? This here is the big one. Kill zones, various Gallowdark terrain rules. Change the fourth bullet point to rule. Read: distance cannot be measured over or through wall terrain. You must measure around it using the shortest possible route, as shown in the diagram below. However, measure distances to areas of the kill zone through walls, so the centre of the kill zone or drop zones, but not objective markers and tokens. So this basically just means that tactical objectives like central control, or anything like hold the line, which needs you to be near or not near opponents' drop zones, or have opponents be near your drop zone. Things like that all work more normally, right? I think there were actually some maps in Gallowdark where you couldn't score central control because there was a wall over the centre of the board. So now central controls become a lot easier to score. The one where you've got to keep opponents out of your kill zones a lot harder to score, and anything where you've got to get into your opponent's kill zones a lot easier to score again. Close quarters. Some tactical ploys allow one or more operatives to be set up outside of your drop zone, e.g. sneaky gating commandos and dimensional translocation for Heretic Circle. In a battle that uses close quarters rules, you cannot do so. Instead, you can use such tactical ploys once per battle at the start of the first firefight phase, and they allow one operative specified by the ploy wholly within your drop zone from a free normal move and or operate hatch action before any operatives are activated. So I'm not going to lie, a bit of a nerf there for commandos, for heretics, for I think Genestealer cults and Mechanicum as well. Those are the 4 teams with forward deploy. I'm pretty sad about that, especially for the heretics, because they're not a top tier team, they're not a top shelf team, they're not doing amazingly well. One of the things they had going for them was that Hunters from Hyperspace, where they could bring in that one model and you could get a victory point and your opponent had to then react and deal with that. I guess it was a bit obnoxious with Mechanicum, because Mechanicum are quite a strong team, and then they have forward deploy as well, and so it feels obnoxious. But for the other teams, like that, Commandos and Necrons were not teams that you think I was doing really, really well. Like, the Commando players, I can imagine being really upset, because their Breacher Boys can't breach, and now they can't sneaky git with their sneaky gits either. So they got, like, no tricks for all their tricks have been turned off. However, I guess it is nice of them to say, you know, we're going to replace it with something which gives you a free normal move, which can include an operate hatch action at the start of the game. That is something. And in some ways, better for the heretics, right? Because your Deathmark has a heavy weapon. And with Hunters from Hyperspace, he'd come down, he'd use an AP to come down, he'd count as having moved and couldn't then shoot. Whereas now on Into the Dark, you can, before the start of the game, you can do a free normal move, operate hatch, walk him up into a position, and then in your turn you can activate and you can shoot with him. So in some ways, for using it to actually kill people, it's better. For using it to grab a cheeky objective, it's worse. In general, I think it's mostly clarifications and cleanups. There are some big changes for Into the Dark, and it's the first of many, if I do this thing and Blinding Aura happens, so I burnt my opportunity to do the thing FAQs. Did I even mention that when I was going through here? I'm sure there's something about guard. And if you're on guard, and then... Have I dreamt that? How does the guard action work? Yeah, we've done that one. We've done that one. Well, spoilers for the rest of the document then. I thought there was a generic one If you were on guard and then your opponent was novitiates and did blinding light, then you were still on guard. Have I just not read that out? Curious. Let me know. Move on. So there was a compendium change. They updated Hive Fleet. So Hive Fleet have a strategic ploy. So this compendium Tyranids have a strategic ploy that says change the relevant part of this rule to read: if it is in cover and has a conceal order or is ready, 1 additional dice can be retained as a successful normal save as a result of the cover, regardless of any rules that treat the operative as having an engage order, e.g. vantage point. So they've slightly buffed compendium Tyranids. Their Hive Fleet strategic ploy, you gain the extra cover dice even if they have vantage. It's weird that going back and doing a slight buff to a compendium 2 now feels odd. But I guess Hive Fleet are one of those more relevant compendium teams, in so much as if you love Tyranids, you're going to play them. You're going to play compendium Tyranids until your bespoke Tyranids come out. You know, there are people out there who have played Kill Team, love Kill Team, but they love their faction. And if their faction is Tyranids, and they'll be there slugging away with their compendium Tyranids, it's nice to see those people get something. So great, good. Does it mean that bespoke Tyranids are being looked at? Or does it mean that bespoke Tyranids are really far away, so they're throwing the Tyranid players a bone? I don't know. Right, onto the faction-specific FAQs now. Corsair Voidsguard. For the purposes of the Plunderer strategic ploy, how do you determine the closest objective marker if hatchways are closed? Always determine the closest objective marker as if the hatchways are open. Good, easy, done. The real theme of these FAQs are cleanups for Into the Dark. That's good. Commando. The blow it up tack up, you can't use it in close quarters. So this is what I meant when I meant that the heavy terrain clarification didn't really make a lot of sense, because you'd think it was to make things like blow it up a bit more reasonable, because you can only blow up the pillars, but you can't blow things up. You just can't use that. I'm not sure if this clarification is new or not, because of the weird way that Games Workshop date their documents. But they have said that the bomb squig cannot score victory points for the capture, hostage, and infiltrate tack-up when it's incapacitated as a result of its bomb squig special rule. So in theory, you could like kill somebody. Like, what was that being asked was basically like, oh, if I kill somebody that I'm near to by exploding, and then I die myself, have I captured them as a hostage? And obviously not, because you've exploded. Yes. Legionaries. So again, this is the same as the Commandos just had. They can't do their Dark Desecration tack up because Dark Desecration is essentially very similar to Seized Ground, and they've decided that those kind of tack ups where you simply interact with heavy terrain are too easy on Into the Dark boards. And here we've got another thing about interrupts. How do interruptions after an operative performs an action, e.g. guard, work with the perpetual aggression strategic ploy? You treat the move as a separate action, so the core operative can be interrupted again after fighting in the combat, but before it moves from the perpetual aggression. Again, there's another clarification in line with all their clarifications about interrupts. Now that we have an interrupt that's going to be happening more frequently, guard is a ubiquitous thing. It's going to come up in every single Into the Dark game, so this is just another smoothing out of exactly how interrupts work. It's the start or the end of discrete actions, even when those actions are chained together. Pathfinders. For the purposes of determining if one less attack dice is rolled as a result of a condensed environment rule, when a drone operative is protecting a friendly operative as a result of the Saviour Protocols rule, do you draw the cover lines to the protected operative, or the drone operative, you draw them to the protective operative? So the condensed environment rule is basically where you get one less attack dice if you're trying to shoot at somebody that's further down a crowded corridor. And what it's saying is that your target is still your target. Your target doesn't magically become the drone, which makes sense because the drone operative, like the whole point of the Saviour Protocols rule, it's abstracting the drone kind of heroically diving into the way of your shot. Your guy is not magically moving his target to target the drone operative. The drone operative abstractedly is kind of moving, and then if it survives, it moves back. Right? That's what's happening there. Phobos! Oh, they've been cheeky with Phobos. So I'll split the Phobos things into two groups. We'll do the left-hand side first. So on the left-hand side here, we've got some really standard things. The Helix Adept cannot revive himself. So this is finally the last of these medic changes that we've rolled out from Season 1, where they have clarified that all medics cannot medic themselves. And the second one here, if you interrupt with track target and you then can't complete the Overwatch action, so if you interrupt an operative activation with track target, but you then cannot complete the Overwatch action because there are no valid targets, such as an initiate player using a blinding or active faith, can I interrupt again in the turning point? In other words, does track target remain? Yes. If you change the order, you can change it back. So there's a lot of these. I thought it was one of the core rules, and then I couldn't find it. But there's a lot of these through the faction FAQs that are effectively a nerf to blinding aura, where basically what it says is if you've spent some kind of resource to do a thing and then your opponent blinding auras so you can't do the thing, the resource is unspent, so you haven't lost the opportunity to ever do that thing. And that idea will recur as we go further through this document. I am sure there was one in the general rules about guard actions in general and about blinding aura not wasting your guard action. Maybe that was a dream. But there certainly is one for the track target action. Right, and over here we've got buffs. So they're just straight up, these are not clarifications Games Workshop. These are straight up buffs that you've put in the wrong document, right? You should have waited for the balanced data slate. Like, for the Phobos players, Phobos are doing really badly. I'm kind of happy that they're trying to buff them, but they have snuck out buffs, like unambiguous buffs at the wrong time. There you go. The Infiltrator Voxbreaker had an action called Vox Break for 1 AP. They could turn on an aura, and then within that aura, your opponent couldn't use rerolls. That is now just an always-on ability for the Voxbreaker, so they always have that aura of your opponent not being able to use rerolls, which is good because it makes the Voxbreaker a model that you might actually want to use from time to time, especially against things like novitiates or people that have loads of relentless guns, that kind of thing. The Incursor Mine Layer, the Haywire Mine. So the Haywire Mine, if you remember, was like quite a weak proximity mine, but it had the stun rule. It wasn't very good. They've now replaced the stun rule with interference, which I think is an amazing rule. Let's read it. So you remove stun, you gain interference. Each time a friendly operative makes a shooting attack with this weapon, in the roll attack dice step of that shooting attack, if you retain any critical hits, the target cannot move any further during this activation. That's massive. So they just stop dead, right? So you put your proximity mine down in a doorway, in a doorway, right? And as they come through the door, they trigger the mine, and whatever else happens, they stop there, and then in your next turn you can shoot them, right? Because they're stood in a doorway going, So it's now really, really good in Into the Dark. Right, still really good in open world, I think, for protecting objectives and protecting models and protecting points. It really gives you another thing to think about and play and use, but that's not all it does. You also subtract one from the remaining action points it has for the activation, if any. So if they've moved with the intention of then doing something else, like shooting or activating an objective, they lose that second APL as well. Previously, it was an action point modifier, so it didn't actually take any effect in the middle of their operation. Now it does. The mine going off interrupts, it freezes them where they are, and they can't even shoot you. Imagine if they were a 2 APL model, they can't even then shoot you because they don't have the second APL to shoot, which is great. If it happens outside the target's activation, you subtract 1 from the number of action points it generates in its next activation. So if it somehow happened that they moved without activating, then you'd still have the -1 APL. Really good change. And what they've done here is they've made 2 models that you would previously not really want to take in your Phobos. They've given them a significant buff, right, in terms of the Mine Layer and the Voxbreaker. 2 that I would previously always consider leaving on the bench, which are now more appealing. They've also made shot grenades cheaper. They're now 2 EP rather than 3 EP. I'm still not going to take a shot grenade, I don't think, because it's still too random. You need to roll that 4 up to get the -1 AP. Vet Guard have literally just got this change again, which is the blinding aura thing, right? If I use a tactical asset and then there's no valid targets, can I still use the tactical asset? Yes. Yeah. So if you call in your airstrike and then your opponent blind, I'm sure there are other things, but your opponent blinding auras, then you still can tactical asset again in the future. Fine. Warpcoven. So Warpcoven got a buff in the balanced data slate to the exalted Astartes ploy. So it says, can a gunner operative perform a shoot action and then a guard action? Yes, they can. As long as they pay the additional action point, you can shoot and then you can guard. Yeah, that's good. Really good, really good. Makes them really good into the dark. Yeah. Wormblade. For the purposes of the cult ambush ability, when a Wormblade operative makes multiple shooting attacks from one shoot action, e.g. blast or torrent, do the rerolls apply to all the shooting attacks or just the first one? It's all of them. I think most people are probably playing it that way. It's an interesting FAQ this, because it doesn't fit either of their main themes for this FAQ, which is kind of stopping blinding light from working on a lot of things, or stopping blinding light from wasting resources, I should say, and cleaning up for Into the Dark. This is neither of those things. This is something separate. But it's good, it's fine. I think it's a perfectly fine clarification. I think most people are already playing it that way, though. Gallowdark Infected have this really weird FAQ that I don't understand. Vulgar Thrice Cursed can only be added to your roster or data slate once. In narrative play, if the operative is slain, does that mean I can never add it again? No, in such instances you could add the operative again, but you can't have more than one operative of this operative on your roster or data slate at once. If it doesn't do that, then what does it do? Because it's not like you could have two copies of Vulgar Thrice Cursed with different equipment. So I really am at a loss to understand what this note, and Star Striders have the same thing. Now that it doesn't do what I thought it did in narrative play, does it do something else in narrative play that I'm not getting because I don't play narrative play? Totally irrelevant to match play anyway. Totally, unless I'm very wrong, totally irrelevant to match play. Navy Breaches, 3 clarifications for the Breaches. The Navis Akchak power weapon is a melee weapon, so they printed the wrong symbol on the card. I'm sure everybody was playing it as a melee weapon. If you were somehow doing ranged attacks with your power axe, then sorry. Breach Wall, change the relevant part of the final sentence to read, unless the enemy operative is at least a circle higher than it. So basically, the Breach Wall ability protects the people behind you. It didn't work if the person shooting was on a vantage point, but then people pointed out that if you were both on the same vantage point, it totally should work, but rules as written it no longer worked. So they've changed is on a vantage point to is at least circle higher than it. Right. And the last one here, even operatives under the effects of a rule that prevents it from activating and or treats it as having a group activation characteristic of 1, such as the Omni Scrambler in the Phobos Strike Team, can it still use the Breach and Clear ability to activate that objective? No. So you can't use Breach and Clear to wipe out the negative effects of something like Omni Scrambler. Which means that it's the usual thing of a negative taking precedence over a positive, which is the case in most rule sets. Intercessors. Interesting Intercessors. I played a game against Zimbad yesterday. My Star Striders versus Intercessors. He won. He usually wins. I actually did pretty well against them. I killed, I think, 3 of them by the end of the game, but he wiped me out. So what are you going to do? So the first one here, if a rule treats an operative as being injured regardless of any rules that say they cannot be injured, e.g. the Rust Animation Strategic Ploy from Gallowdark Infected, does the Methodical Chapter Tactics still ignore the Ballistic Skill and Weapon Skill characteristic modifiers? No. So I think everybody understood this. There are a couple of Nurgle type rules in, I think, Plague Bearers have it as well. Plague Marines might have access to it as well, which says you count as injured regardless of any other rules. Methodical will be one of those other rules that you've just been instructed not to have regard towards. So I don't really understand what the argument was as to why Methodical would protect you from this Gallowdark Infected rule. It doesn't, or any other rule of that type that specifically says regardless of any other rules. The second one is interesting. If an intercession squad operative is incapacitated during its activation, can I use the Wrath of Vengeance tactical ploy freely, or do action restrictions still apply? Action restrictions still apply. So with Bolt and Discipline in mind, if the operative has already performed 2 shoot actions in his activation, you cannot use Wrath of Vengeance to perform a 3rd shoot action. So this one I don't know. Like, it's one of those things where whether something is, with the exception of the Phobos things, which are unambiguously buffs, a lot of times in FAQs, whether something is a buff or a nerf or a clarification depends. It's like a socially constructed thing. If you were already playing it the way Games Workshop are playing it, then it doesn't feel like a buff or a nerf. But if everybody believed it was being played differently, sometimes it feels like a buff or a nerf. It's a very socially constructed thing. I'm going to have to check with Zimbad. Even though we played yesterday, we were both half asleep and I can't really remember. He does use Wrath of Vengeance a lot. Whenever I manage to kill a Marine, the Marine gets extra shot off. I'm going to have to check with him whether he was previously using that to get a 3rd shoot attack with bolters, and now he's learned that he can't do that. So that would make it an effective nerf. I feel that may have been happening. I don't know. So maybe Intercessor players would regard this as a nerf rather than a clarification. I'm not sure. Star Striders, it's the same stuff largely that we've been having all through the FAQ. So if we use a support asset and suddenly there are no valid targets, can you cancel the asset and use it later in the turning point? Yes. Now, what's interesting about that, I suppose, is that the privateer support asset is an activation. So how does this actually work? If I declare for my activation, I'm activating my support asset, and then they say, okay, I'm using Blinding Light, and then I say, okay, as per the FAQ, I'm cancelling my asset. Does that mean that I then pass activation over to my opponent because I have activated my support asset, I cancelled it, but that's used my activation, and now I've got an extra activation because I activate my support asset again this turn? Or does it mean that I cancel my asset and instead nominate a separate operative to activate in that activation? In the absence of clarification, I will play it the latter way, right? So I cancel it and activate a different operative. But that seems weird because there's been a whole interaction and the Novitiates player has spent faith points in an activation that then didn't happen and was cancelled. It's different to the guard one because the guard one doesn't come in on a separate activation. Interesting. Let me know your thoughts below. When using the well-drilled tactical ploy, can I select another ready friendly operative as required and then subsequently use a privateer support asset instead? No. That mirrors an FAQ that they did for Vet Guard back in the day, where you can't use GA2 to call in a support asset. And then the same weird thing about Euclidean Vein and narrative play, and if she dies, you can re-add her, so then what does the rule mean to begin with? I've already covered that on the Gallowdark slide. Doesn't make sense to me. The Fast Striker Kin Band got 2 changes. So they have special ammo, the piercing shot and the toxin shot, that can be bought for somebody with a Krut rifle or a pistol. And it's saying that unless I'm armed with a Krut rifle, it has the range red special rule. Because previously, rules was written, you bought the ammo didn't have the rule on it. It said you could buy it for a pistol. You could buy your pistol up to having unlimited range, technically. I don't think anybody was playing it that way unless they were really trying hard to get every possible advantage. So this is bringing it in line with what makes sense to me. The mercenary contract thing is a bit of a surprise though. So their tactical ploy mercenary contract allows them to take attack up from an unselected archetype. And I would have assumed, and Zimbad assumed, they were limited to the unselected archetypes that they otherwise could have selected. But actually, you can take attack up from any archetype, which is pretty cool. Okay, makes it a bit of a little buff. So, summing up, a few sneaky buffs in there, I think, for Phobos. Mostly, though, it's genuine typos and things. If I've missed any nuances, please do let me know in the comments. I really feel like the Into the Dark stuff could have all been collated together and pushed up as a separate FAQ. And I kind of think that the various changes about blinding light not interrupting or not wasting your opportunity to do a thing that you've spent a resource on, that could have been an initiate's FAQ rather than like 4 FAQs in different places. But potentially they're planning on bringing in additional stuff that can interrupt and stop things from having valid targets, so it's future proofing, I guess. I wish that Games Workshop would do an article still. I said this on the last FAQ video. I wish GW would do an article when they drop an FAQ to explain like the commentary behind the FAQ rather than just leaving us to speculate like they do for the balanced data slate. That would be good. Final thing, I just need 21 more subscriptions to get to 1k subs. So if you are watching this, if you enjoyed it, if you throw the channel a subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. My aim is to get to 1k subs before the end of the year. So yeah, I just need 21 more. That doesn't seem like many, does it? Alright guys, cheerio. I hope you've enjoyed that rundown, and I hope you have a great day, whatever it is that you're doing. Cheery bye.